Hola, bienvenidos. Welcome to week 6 of our course about translanguaging. I'm very happy that we are at week 6 right now. As you know, if you have seen the syllabus, this is the last week where you have readings. The next 2 weeks, you will be doing your work on your own, reading your own readings in relation to your final paper, and also doing your presentation, your multimodal presentation. Week 6, as you see, is about transformative translanguaging, social justice, and social emotional well-being. This is a very important topic, and I usually leave it at the end because I want you to use all the course content in order to design instruction that will allow for transformative translanguage, but that will allow for a transformative experience for your students towards social justice and toward their emotional well-being. For this week, we have 2 readings. Chapter 11 from our book, and the title of chapter 11 is Social Emotional Well-Being and Social Justice. And the second reading is also by Garcia, but Garcia and Sanchez, and it's a more recent chapter that they just published a year ago. So I hope that but with these 2 chapters, you will have an introduction to the topic of this week. So let's start with the first reading. In this slide, you have a couple of quotations from the chapter that I would like you to concentrate on. So in chapter 11 of the Translanguaging Classroom book, the authors focus on 2 themes that create a positive learning environment for emerging bilinguals. These 2 themes are social emotional well-being and social justice. I'm sure that you have worked in your own classroom and in your own school and school districts. You have received a lot of professional development and you have been working towards social emotional well-being. In recent years, it's really apparent that this is a area of focus by school districts across the nation. The second theme is social justice, and this may be a theme that is a little new to you, or maybe you have heard about it, or maybe you are focused on it, but I am sure that there will be different perspectives and experiences, levels of experiences on how to incorporate social justice in your own teaching. So I hope that you will use this content in your own teaching. As seen in both quotations from the chapter, students can learn better when their social emotional needs are met by their teachers and their school. Incorporating students' entire linguistic repertoire, right? What we have been studying in this course throughout. Incorporating the students' entire linguistic repertoire while honoring their languaging and culture makes students feel comfortable with who they are by creating positive identities both in and outside the classroom. So if you think about it, I mean, how important it is that you open up the possibility for students to bring their own ways of speaking, right? Without limiting them. So they can really express who they are and express and develop an identity that is positive, right? The author's translanguaging stance is to treat students con respeto, con cariño, como familia y con acompañamiento. And this is something that might be also something that you already do in your classroom. So please go ahead and use all that experience when you develop when you design your instruction, when you develop your lesson plan this week. Okay, now let's talk about translanguaging and social justice. So this theme is creating a positive learning environment for emerging bilinguals when using the translanguaging to create and fight for social justice. As seen in the two quotes here, social justice refers to creating a more equitable world, and Freire is one of the main, most known authors that have developed the idea of social justice. And he introduced us the notion of critical consciousness. The translanguaging classroom helps create equity and social justice by honoring students' languages and cultures as assets to their learning, as opposed to being deficits, right? And that I think that by now, this is very, very clear. When we do not include the students' cultures and languages and languaging, we do not utilize their assets, but we focus on the deficits and what they lack. And so we don't want them to think that they need to erase their own language practices. So a social justice classroom is a democratic classroom whereby the teacher is not the sole authority, right? That is not the sole one in control of learning, is not the sole authority on learning, but rather she gives up that control. The students are also teachers themselves, whose experiences, languages, and knowledges add to other students' learning as well. So that is very important. It's when the teacher understands that she should not be in control all the time, but should recognize students as possible teachers of others in her classroom, right? And so when it's not it so translanguaging does not only include the languages that students bring, but also organizing instruction in a way that students also participate actively, feel ownership of their learning process and that of others or other students in the classroom. So I find this reading fascinating, and also I think that you will learn a lot of new things here. Most teachers have not really studied the history of the Spanish language and in the U.S., right? And this chapter really introduces in a very interesting way the history of colonization and the history of Latinx languaging in the U.S. I also like that the authors present the concept of racial linguistic ideologies. This is key to understand how languages are valued, how translanguaging is valued in schools. No, the authors explain that racial linguistics racial linguistic ideologies have produce the languaging of Latinx as something that is deficient, right? And it's because there is a wide listening subject. So this is kind of the ideal model speaker that speaks this perfect, quote unquote, perfect standard, quote unquote, quote English. And so whenever this ideal speaker listens to us Latinx people, they listen to us as they listen to our languaging as deficient, right? And that is so important to understand, because it doesn't, what Flores and Rosa say is that it really doesn't matter how we speak. It really does matter. We will be always listen to having a deficient or mixed language practice, no? So the authors introduce the language practices of Latinx populations in the United States, and really explain the nexus of dominant language, race, and power structures, right? And how that nexus or those power structures have inhibited equitable education outcomes for Latinx students in the United States. So I hope you really enjoy this reading. I think you will learn a lot from it. And to finalize, just a few other ideas that I would like to highlight from this reading. So Garcia and Sanchez suggest that teachers do away with notions such as home or native language, and terms such as ESL, because for many US Latinx students, their home or native language is both English and Spanish, but not the English or Spanish of the dominant group. So that's important to note. I know it's hard because we use these terms and this discourse every day, but this is their proposal, and I think it's worth to consider. The languaging practices of many US Latinx students is dynamic and fluid, as you have been learning in this class. It cannot be categorized as either an L1 or an L2. I know this is the way that we have been using, our terms, right? L1 and L2, because we consider those languages as separate languages. But now that we have been learning about translanguaging, that's why the authors really suggest that we consider a bilingualism that is more dynamic. And so L1 and L2 wouldn't make sense anymore. Therefore, a classroom that embraces translanguaging honors the linguistic resources and knowledges and the dynamism of Latinx bilingual students. Translanguaging does away with hierarchies of language and culture. And so, quoting Flores and Rosa, translanguaging in the classroom is a political act meant to disrupt linguistic and racial structures in US schooling and education. So that's why it is so important to talk about translanguaging when we consider social equity, social justice for Latinx students. So now that you have read these two chapters, I really would like to encourage you to use the contents of these two chapters in your lesson plan for this week. In addition, I want you to use, of course, follow the instructions in Blackboard, but also use the content that you have been developing and acquiring throughout the course. So now is the time to put in practice and apply these concepts that you have been learning in the course. Well, thank you so much for your attention, and I am looking forward to reading your final papers, your lesson plans that you're going to design this week, but also your final papers and your presentation in the last weeks of the course.